Welcome to part 5 of effective B2B ad campaigns, where we get deep into attribution. Everybody's favorite topic. Okay. B2B attribution is notoriously crappy and difficult. And that's because they're for a variety of reasons, which I will quickly list off. One is that you're dealing with a low volume of data, which makes it hard to do statistical analyses. 2, you've got complex journeys. 3 is that you have multiple buyers. 4 is that there's more and more challenges around traffic source tracking due to privacy constraints, such as iOS 15 through 17, the so-called death of the cookie. It is getting much more difficult for traditional analytics tools to appropriately label your traffic sources and take those anonymous session visits and de-anonymize them with an appropriate source label. When you add all this up, you end up with a landscape that makes it really challenging for B2B marketing teams to lay out the effectiveness of their different efforts. But what I'm going to do in this sort of brief article is get into a few different ways that we sort of triangulate in on what's working and what's not working in our efforts. So let's start with sort of the platinum standard. The first thing you can do with your ad campaigns is obviously drive your records to fill out a native in-app lead form, right? And if you can successfully do that, it's pretty easy to then do attribution back to your spend and campaign and even ad level. However, we know that that's a high friction activity, and very few people at the end of the day end up filling out an in-app lead form. There's always going to be a few, and it's probably a campaign that you will always have on, especially if you've dialed in your offer. Check out what Ramp and ZipHQ are doing in that respect. However, it's not going to be how you're able to attribute the majority of your spend. That being said, now we get into kind of part 2, method 2, the gold standard, which is traditionally done through an analytics tool. Obviously the big behemoth is Google Analytics, which helps label sources of traffic and tells you where they're coming from, and then can hopefully pass that information down to the lead form level. However, what we've seen is that increasingly Google is labeling more and more traffic as unassigned, and that's in part due to challenges with source parameters and IDs being stripped out from Apple, as well as from ad blocker web browsers with ad blockers, et cetera, et cetera. And then, if you kind of take the landscape of these tools, it's not just Google that's having this trouble. We see this happening with Factors, which is another analytics tool that we've employed. We see this with HubSpot when we get into their traffic tool. It's hard. But all that being said, it is possible to start attributing a fair amount of your lead forms down to a first touch or last touch source of traffic. Especially if you use UTM parameters, which, if you're not doing, warning flag, you gotta be using UTM parameters. And you have to set those UTM parameters up correctly in order for them to be recognized by Google. And in fact, we have a little UTM link builder spreadsheet that we recommend folks use. And you just have to always make sure that your medium says CPC. That's a good quick note. UTM params and an analytics tool like GA or Factors help us understand, a good portion of our ad spend and where that can be attributed to, but definitely not all of it. So the next step to understanding the efficiency of our ads is looking at, obviously, some self-reported data from our sales team. Not always the most reliable, but definitely helpful. Here we can see that a good chunk of our opportunity generation is attributing attributing themselves to having seen our ads, right? So we set up our marketing ops team sets things up so that this is automated by default by source, passed through by the lead form, and then our sales team updates it and confirms it in discovery calls. Challenge here is that we're not always able to drill down to necessarily the campaign level, but again, it gives us directional data to tell us what's working, what's not working, and if we even get into like lead source detail, we can see that they see things like they've been seeing our Instagram ads. They say things like that in calls. You can also pass through or hard code from a tool like Segment or HubSpot or a tool like PostHog, the first source and latest source of that form submit. And that's what we do. And that lets us help drill down to a channel level spend. But that's significant investment of time. You got to either have a marketing ops person who can do that. You've got to either get an engineer or product person to help you do that if you're a non-technical marketer, or you've got to bring in an external consultant to do it. So then we've figured out like kind of a third way to triangulate in on performance. And the next thing we do is we look at a tool like Koala or Clearbit Reveal, or I wouldn't recommend a lead feeder, but there's a variety of tools that allow you to have reverse IP data and see who's sort of guess which accounts based on their IP address have been visiting your site, and we can then triangulate it back those accounts to our primer audiences to understand if we've been serving ads to those audiences and how that's been if that's driving traffic from the accounts we know we want to be targeting, and how that's changing over time as we're increasing or decreasing our ad spend. Lastly, the fourth or fifth final way in that we track performance is by looking at our spend on a weekly basis, seeing via a tool like Koala who's visiting our website that's within our ICP, how many of those websites that are visiting, how many of those site visitors are within the audiences that we've built inside of Primer, how many have requested demos, how many ops in total are generated, and then how many ops can we attribute back to the audience that we've been targeting. And all in, this starts drilling us down into a return on ad spend and LTV to CAC number that we can feel good about or not so great about and adjust as we go further. So in summary, there's no one way to do attribution, especially as you're an early stage company. I would not recommend getting into multi-touch attribution. You're not going to have the data you need to do it the right way, which is marketing mix modeling. But what you can do is use off-the-shelf reporting from a tool like Factors or Google Analytics, plus UTM parameters to start being able to say where the majority of your lead form submits are coming from. Then you can layer on, obviously CRM level reporting to tie source back to pipeline generated and close won revenue. And then if you're looking for a leading indicator that kind of sits somewhere in between, you can use a reverse IP tool like Koala, Clearbit Reveal, Kickfire, to say, hey, are we moving the needle amongst our target accounts or not with our ad spend? The beauty of Primer is that it lets you understand exactly who's within your audiences down to a person or company level, which then allows you to attribute your ad spend back to demos and opportunities more easily. So hope you find this helpful. It's not an easy or one-size-fits-all solution, but there's still a lot you can do, and it doesn't have to take a ton of work to get stood up.